Good morning. Good morning. Wonderful to see you all arriving on this beautiful day. We gather together as family and friends of Bob Jones to remember and celebrate his unique life. My name is Sherry Woodbury, and I'm the minister here at First Unitarian Church of Omaha, where Bob was a member for over 30 years, and Diane was too. On behalf of the family, I welcome you all and thank you for being here. A few items of housekeeping. If you parked in the parking garage, you can. There are 2 free hours in there, and then they charge $1 per hour after that. It's now a city-owned garage, so that's changed a little bit. Bathrooms are past the piano, just outside that door, or you can go out the back and downstairs, and there are 2 down there. And tissue packets may be found in the hymnal racks. We in this room represent many different connections to Bob: family, friends, fellow Unitarians, professional colleagues, perhaps other art lovers and artists. We come together for the shared purpose of marking the end of his life. Let us acknowledge that those in this room have lost a dear one, changing our own lives. As we share grief, gratitude, and memories today, let us make room for all of the feelings that may arise: sorrow, joy, and anger, numbness, loss, or shock, appreciation, tears, laughter, confusion. No authentic feeling is out of place in this time. Together we reconnect to our relationship with Bob, and we celebrate his special life. And I invite Michael forward now to light the chalice. Grandson Nevada Jones has a piano piece for us, "Time Moves on the Prairie." Thank you for that, Nevada. And now son Matthew shares a poem, Arcadia, by Tom Stoppard.
How about that, Nevada? Very nice. Very nice. And the cellist. Anyway, this was a sort of from the play Arcadia, Tom Stoppard, and when he passed, I became familiar with it, and it just sort of stuck with me. And then I shared with my dad when he could still sort of understand things, and he kind of gave me a nod and closed his eyes, and so he got it. So I'm going to share that with you folks. It's short. It's not long. Okay. We shed as we pick up, like travelers who must carry everything in their arms, and what we let fall will be picked up by those behind. The procession is very long, and life is very short. We die on the march, but there is nothing outside the march, so nothing can be lost to it. That's all.
Loved ones will now share some reflections on Bob and his life. We're going in order of age, so we begin with Michael.
Thanks. I want to thank everyone for coming. It's hard to sort of summarize the high points of somebody who lives over 100 years, but I thought I'd tell a couple stories that happened when I was younger that kind of give you an idea about who my dad was and what he was like. The first one was an episode I remember. I think I was about 6 years old. My favorite TV show at that time was Captain Midnight. I don't know if any of you remember Captain Midnight. It later changed to Jet Jackson, but Captain Midnight was a Korean War hero who then solved major crimes and saved the country from disasters. Anyway, he had a special society, the secret command or secret patrol that you could be a member of, which I was, and I had a special decoder ring. And the decoder ring would allow me to decode the number messages that were given at the end of every show. And I'd just gotten my ring and was watching the show, and something happened. My mother wanted me, or what, I can't remember. I had to leave. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to miss the numbers. And I had to leave, and I came back, and I was frantic, and of course, I missed the numbers. And I was really upset. I said, I can't believe I missed the numbers. I'll never get that back. My father, who was in an adjacent room, said, well, I heard some numbers, so I wrote them down. And I was startled. I thought, oh my gosh. And I translated the numbers. I solved the numbers. And I think it was either be brave or drink Ovaltine. I couldn't remember which. But anyway, so I thought and reflected, and I thought, God, I'm glad he's my dad. He did that for me. That was so wonderful. The other little anecdote was we were a little older. My family traveled a lot, and we were in Canada fishing. And my father had the idea that we would go, because the fishing where we were wasn't very good, but we would go to a lake further up north, and the only way to get there was on a pontoon plane. So he and I got on the pontoon plane with this very nice man and flew us up this very beautiful remote lake, gorgeous, surrounded by trees and beautiful rocks. It was just a gorgeous place. And a boat was there on the shore that they kept for us with gasoline, and we had brought our tackle and a big barrel of minnows, a big bucket of minnows to use for bait. And we got in the boat and motored out to the middle of the lake and started to get ready. And he said, well, put the minnows in the water to keep them fresh. And it was an unusual minnow bucket, and I wasn't quite familiar with it, but I grabbed the top of it and lifted it in and put it in the water and tied it up to the boat. And we were getting ready, getting our gear out. He said, okay, well, get me a minnow. And I reached down and I lifted the bucket up, and all I got was the top. And I thought, oh my God. So the bottom of the minnow bucket containing the minnows was now drifting down to the bottom of the lake. And I thought, oh no, here we were in this remote, no way to call anyone, of course, remote lake. And I looked at him and he goes, well, I'll see if I can get it. So in this icy water, he takes his shirt and pants off, dives into the water, dives down. I thought, am I ever going to see him again? Dives down. I couldn't see him. He's down for a minute almost. Came back up. I couldn't get to the bottom. I thought, oh my God. He didn't say anything like, how stupid was that? He didn't say, you dummy, you ruined our trip, all the things I was thinking going through my mind. He said, let's see, I think I've got some lures. So he had some lures that were there in his tackle box, and we fished with those for a while. Weren't going to catch anything with that, but he did, I think, catch a small fish. So we decided to go to the shore and explore. And we found some blueberries, wild blueberries, and we spent the day, about 5 hours, just walking around this beautiful lake, touring it. And when I got back, the pilot came in finally and got us back home. And I thought to myself, I ruined this trip, but it was a wonderful trip to be with my father in this gorgeous natural setting with a beautiful experience, eating wonderful wild blueberries. And I'll never forget that he didn't give me the business about losing the minnows. I felt terrible about it. I still feel badly about it. But anyway, that's just the kind of person he was.
We continue with Sarah.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. It's really nice of you to come. I'm his second child, and I was going to share some memories that capture some of the themes of his life. We grew up in the post-war years, and we were part of the boomer generation. And he was starting his psychiatric practice. Our parents bought a nice little house out in what was then West Omaha, now Central Omaha. And the house had a yard. Dad loved the yard, but he didn't have a lot of time. So we had a raspberry patch. And that was the main thing that occupied him in the yard. But he loved the out-of-doors, and this was his little patch of out-of-doors. And much later, he got a much bigger patch of the out-of-doors, which he enjoyed for many years. In 1957, the first satellite was launched, and he made sure we all got outside and watched Sputnik streak across the sky. And that launched in him a great curiosity about space. We talked a lot about space. We imagined space. We tried to figure out, how do you get something like that up in the air and make it go around? And so he eventually pursued his interest in the stars and had a large, large telescope and would go on a lot of dark trips. So you go out to the middle of the state to an area that's considered dark, and you watch the sky and you get familiar with all the different constellations. Anyway, he had a natural curiosity about many, many things like that. So one small thing like Sputnik would blossom into a great appreciation for astronomy. He was always busy. There was very little downtime. So we were always busy, whether we wanted to be or not. And we had a long list of activities, like it or not. And so that was a theme, I think, that grew out of his relationship with his mom. She was a very busy lady. You never sat down if you didn't have something in your hands, and you weren't doing some work. So working hard and working a lot was essential. The Cuban Missile Crisis started in the fall of '62, and my dad was not afraid of much. If it wasn't war, there was nothing to worry about. He survived World War II, survived the Philippines and the Battle of Okinawa, and everything else paled by comparison. But this was the Cuban Missile Crisis, so it was looking a little more like war. So, of course, being a busy, active person, what do? You build a bomb shelter in this little house in then West Omaha. And I had a fair amount of skepticism about things. I was skeptical about the desks, hiding under your desks. I didn't think that was going to work. I was skeptical about the bomb shelter. It had a lot of reinforced concrete. It was very small, and I had no idea how we were going to survive as a family in that space, because there was going to be a war inside if there wasn't a war outside. So he would solve the problems that he could solve in the way he could solve them. One day I fell down and I broke my arm. He was a man of, if there's a problem, you solve it. He went in the basement into his workshop and he made a splint. No sympathy, just a splint. We took many, many long camping trips and had really incredible adventures. He was an adventurer. He loved adventures. He loved being away. So solving problems, being an adventurer, and even though we were in a tent someplace, if a storm came up, if it wasn't a war, he wasn't scared. So then I wasn't scared. Anyway, Dad and Mom were very curious. They loved learning things. Books and art were very important to all of us. He made sure we knew the importance of getting outside to do yard work and go on hikes, especially in the fall. We grumbled about it, but to this day, I love hiking and taking long walks and remembering that. He loved golf, sailing, pottery, farming. He pursued all these interests intensely, especially the pottery. But to this day, my siblings and I argue about who crewed in the sailboat most often with our dad. In 1981, I joined him in practice in Omaha. We collaborated for 15 years. My brother had his gastrointestinal GI practice on the floor above ours. He imparted many valuable lessons about patient care, the intricacies of managing a practice with the help of our wonderful Sherry Dye, who's here today. We were so fortunate. After retiring, he continued to provide very compassionate care on a volunteer basis at the Siena Francis House and the Open Door Mission. He had deep compassion and respect for his patients. With Abby's assistance, he was able to pen his recollections of the war. Additionally, a trip to Okinawa in 1995, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Okinawa, played a pivotal role in helping him overcome his formative trauma. There was an effort at that event, for those who wanted it, for reconciliation. He could meet with a military man from Japan, and they could talk about the war from their own perspectives. He came to recognize that the Japanese were brave and they endured immense suffering, and it really helped him to be able to get beyond that. Throughout his life, he remained devoted to our mother. When she fell ill, he adapted to her needs and ensured that she lived at home. In his later years, he continued to find joy in many things: his pottery, art, reading, appreciating the beauty of flowers, birds. With the support of Bruce, Abby, Mark, Mike, Matt, and Maggie, along with unwavering dedication of caretakers like Linda, who's here today, we appreciate her so much. He was able to remain at home and pursue his interests. We are deeply grateful for this opportunity to have taken care of him. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Matthew continues the sharing.
Anticipation. Anyway, I've got a few little memories, much sort of like Mike's. One is he had this really big leather chair and sort of settee with it, or sort of footstool. And I remember sort of challenging him to see if he would grab me and tickle me until I fought and got away. And then I'd always end up kind of coming back to see if he'd capture me again and tickle me. And that's as I was trying to prepare for speaking, that was kind of the first memory I had of just this physical tickling and joy that was. And another one was in 4th grade. We were skiing out at Crescent Ski Hills, and I unfortunately broke my leg. And, and then I remember sort of being carried in from the car into the house by Dad, and I could just kind of see getting out of the car and sort of following on the driveway into the door and then up the stairs. And I got to sleep on his side of the bed. I'm sure that was Mom's idea. And being a bedwetter, that was a big ask, That was, you gotta hand it to him. That was a big deal. And another time we were at the farm, and some of the other siblings helped build fence, and we're up off in the south part of the farm, and we heard these motorcycles, and there was like a off-road motorcycle race going on, and they didn't really check the boundaries, and they were coming onto our property, and he was furious. It was just, and I'm just sort of standing there, the loud noise, and you hear it, and then the cycles would come and go, and there was Dad with a fence post trying to shoo them away, and they would just kind of, scoot out of the way, and we finally went down and talked to the people running it, and we could hear comments of this crazed farmer throwing objects at the cyclists. And that was Dad, and he was kind of apologized and understood that there was a mistake, and they continued on with their race. And another farm story I have was he wanted to raise cows. And it was going to be a Limousin Angus, Black Angus mix. Very specific. He knew what he wanted. And then, it was in junior high, and there was an afternoon being out at the farm, and I found myself with a plastic glove up to my shoulder. It's like, what's this about? And then pretty soon, I've got my hand in the lower bowel of a female cow, trying to locate the cervix to tip it so he could artificially inseminate it. And I was like, okay, I've never done this before. I hope it works. I hope it takes. And that's sort of was hanging around with Dad. You know, this is what you get to do. Okay, so now this, according to comment, this is to illustrate the stoicism and the tenacity and the just, doggedness that Bob Jones was. And this is our first year racing out at Lake Manawa. And this was an old boat, and it wasn't very fast. It was one of the few races where we weren't last. We were doing pretty well, but we capsized, maybe 30, 40 yards before the finish line. And this boat, as you can see, is full of water. I mean, it's not floating. And I'll be damned if he wasn't going to still finish the race. We were going to sail it, and we were in good position. Everybody passed us, and the racing crew, or the crew that managed the race, stayed out till we finally crossed the finish line. And you can see, if you look close, you can see in my face that Dad, the boat is full of water. We're not going anywhere. But this is Bob Jones. Tenacity. Stoicism. That's all I've got.
Abby, you are next.
So before I get to speak about this incredible man, I do have to take a few minutes to thank the extraordinary caregivers. I mean, we couldn't have done this without Linda Roof, who was my sort of surrogate mom, caregiver extraordinaire, without Valerie Sievers, who brought a ton of joy and enthusiasm, always energy to do crosswords with Dad. There was a lot of crossword puzzling and bird watching and caretaking and mobility work to keep him going. All the folks from the nursing organization, the night nurses who were there with him every night during his last days. I just have to thank them profusely. We are incredibly grateful. All the schedule, yeah, thank you. The dear friends from the church who came out to see Dad when he couldn't move around, they helped him unload the kiln. My girlfriends, my squad who came out and brought his favorite Lacey cookies and would have dinner with him. Yeah, we wouldn't have made it this long without everybody's support and compassion. Dave Branham always fixing things at our house. Terry Michael keeping us clean and organized. I mean, everybody. There's such an army of people. All of you contributed to this extraordinary life, and our lovely neighbors, plowing us every winter. But I want to take you back 103 years. For those of you who might remember, 1925, most of you would not remember, actually, 1925 was the year Calvin Coolidge was inaugurated. The artistic movements of Art Deco and Surrealism burst onto the scene, and F. Scott Fitzgerald published The Great Gatsby. And in Central City, Nebraska, Robert Dale Jones was born. Dad was a man defined by his era. He built an extraordinary immunity after experiencing all kinds of multiple childhood diseases, quite young, because this was all before vaccines. And he was even quarantined with scarlet fever as a young boy, and it forced his dad to crawl out of the window to go to work at the railroad and then crawl back into the window to come into the house so he could stay away from Dad when he had scarlet fever. Then came the Dust Bowl, and then the Depression. Not surprisingly, Dad was a star student and an athlete who finished high school early so he could start college early so he stood a better chance at getting a higher rank in the military. They knew what was coming. He and his parents knew it, and Pearl Harbor sealed the deal. After basic training, he headed to the Pacific, where he would survive the swampy jungles of Leyte. Leyte was very different from Okinawa. Leyte was jungly, wet, and my dad somehow found a way to fall asleep in the muddy trenches. And I think most of you probably read in the obit that he also went 3 days without food and water. Occasionally could get a coconut to drink some water. But he had nothing in those trenches but fear and darkness as a blanket. Most of you know the story of Okinawa in '45, when he, as a buck sergeant and leader of his squad, they obviously recognized his talents and promoted him to buck sergeant. They were getting pounded by Japanese knee mortar shells. My dad could watch the arc of the shells, and he told his guys to just stay still, and he will tell them when to run, because he could kind of project how the distance of when these shells would come raining down on them. Of course, one shot up, he yelled at his guys to run, they all ran, and of course it exploded right where they all had been lying. One of them, well, a couple, 3 of them actually, embedded in his leg and his arm. And we recently found the fragments along with this box with his Purple Heart. And it's like this big. I mean, I just can't imagine having something like this embedded in his body. Although desperate to get back to his men, he really wanted, and they wouldn't let him because he was bleeding a lot. They shipped him to a military hospital in Guam. His boot was filling with blood. He was looking around. He's like, where's all this blood coming from? And, oh, me. And, you know, it ultimately required a blood transfusion. And when you read back the letters that he wrote his parents, because we have all these letters, it was so understated. He's like, yeah, I got a little injury. I'm in Guam. You know, I mean, he did not want his parents to worry. And when he heard about the dropping of the atom bomb, he and his men just simply didn't believe it. Propaganda, they thought, just did not believe it. But of course, it saved his life. By the time I came along, we were a house where fascinating currents flowed, if you haven't guessed that already. Lots of ideas all the time flowing through the house. Jung, Freud, Ellis, Adler, Luthi, the latter being the developer of mess painting. This filled our basement on 91st Avenue. This was developed in the 70s, of course. This was a therapeutic practice designed to bypass the brain's critical editor and release suppressed emotional energy by wild and free painting on newsprint. So our basement was filled with newsprint covered with wild and free crazy paints everywhere. He and my mother were also local pioneers of biofeedback therapy, and it was standard practice to hook me up and my friends with electrodes and experiment with the equipment. We would have to like do our guided imagery and try to raise our body temperature with the equipment, try to relax. I could use it now, as a matter of fact. You know, your average, typical childhood. You know, this one, oh my God, this was before my time, but I just recently learned this, that he tried to make a roast by roasting the roast on a car engine during a trip to Mexico, and he strapped the roast onto the engine, presumably in foil, I'm guessing, and they would stop at a gas station and say, you know, please check the oil and then please check the roast. this may have been the same trip to Mexico where the Mexican locals saw this ramshackle American family in this beat-up trailer and thought we were, as they say, unhoused. When I was quite little, we were also drug out to the farm. At that point, there was a red outhouse, not much more than that. And we missed the moon landing, of course, because we had no television. So I was ordered outside to go play in the mud and look for arrowheads. There was also the sawmill period. He cut his hand badly, taped it with duct tape, drove himself to the emergency room, which will surprise no one. And Sarah referenced the astronomy period. That was big. We have a giant telescope in the garage. If anyone wants it or knows someone who might want a giant telescope, we have that in the garage. And of course, our sailing years. I think I sailed more than Matt, but we can talk about that later. But he had, he won a decent share of races, and he had an incredible sense of the wind. He just could read the currents and read the wind. And fortunately for me, he had the strength to hoist himself up. Once you capsize in Lake Manawa, your mast sticks in the mud. And so it doesn't turtle in Manawa because it's so shallow. So the boat goes over, and Dad, we fall into the lake. We're in foul weather gear most of the time, heavy rain gear, and he would physically hoist himself up on the back of the centerboard and bounce and bounce and bounce to free the mast from the mud. And that was how we could get out of those situations. And then, as Matt said, that's when you start bailing out water. Several times, mind you. Yeah. I'm sure you're kind of noting a theme here, and so much of it involves mud. But we were fancy too. There was the show dog period, and we had this beautiful white standard poodle whose AKC name was Rose Blanca of Wall Hollow, named after our street, out at the farm, our road, our gravel road. And Blanca was on the beauty circuit, actually, for many years, and took home more ribbons than your average human beauty pageant queen. But the strongest current was always art. Somehow, in the midst of his busy medical career, he found time to pursue it. He consumed it, inhaled it, surrounded himself with it. And if he wasn't building an illegal kiln in the garage of our Hickory Street home, he was dragging me off to art auctions or taking photos of every single Netsky figurine in the British Museum in London when I was an annoying and terribly bored 12-year-old. And the beauty, though, of this kind of torture took years to reveal itself. His farm, of course, was another canvas. He cultivated his native prairie for years, chopping away at the worst invasive species and conducting controlled burns under the watchful eye of environmental authorities, mud and fire. Which brings me to his pottery, of course, the very mud and clay that was both an antagonist and protector during the war, would take shape in his strong hands. At the end of his life, when he had given up throwing pots, he began writing titles or captions and taping them to the pots. These pots had so many stories to tell, hidden shapes and messages that would reveal themselves in 2,340 degrees Fahrenheit. And these mementos will live on to represent our Father, the earth, the mud, the clay, and the man who shaped it. Survival, strength, art, ideas, compassion, and love. That's my dad.
Abby, and Rio is going to wrap up the family sharing.
Thank you so much. Really love hearing all of these wonderful stories about Bobby, or Grandpa Bob. One of the last words that Bobby, or Grandpa Bob to me, said to me was peace. He touched his heart and said, peace. Just sort of not really prompted by anything. I mean, I'm sure it was. I didn't say anything. He just said it. And I feel like that is something that we have all gotten from him. And now we are celebrating his peace. I am so grateful to my parents for schlepping us out to the farm almost every weekend as a kid. My brothers and I, and we'd often see all of our very cool cousins and my amazing aunts and uncles. Everyone's so incredibly brilliant in this Jones family, and extend Jones and many other last names involved in there. One of my favorite memories that I go to a lot is, I was a pretty anxious kid, still am pretty anxious. Some might call it a disorder in this family. I think he saw that, and he was really excited about this four-wheeler that he got, which, is meant for, getting up and down all those hills at the farm and doing farm things, not really for a 4 or 3-year-old. But much to my father's dismay, I think, he would plop me on the four-wheeler and ride as fast as he could to go get the mail all the way at the end of that wall hollow, which was a stretch on some gravel, very bumpy, and hold me really tight. And it was one of the most freeing feelings I've ever had. And it really helped calm me down. Many years later, we were on a hike up at the farm and hiking up to the divide, and it was, there was 2 feet of snow, but of course that didn't stop Bobby. And we had gone so far past this ancient rusty tractor and then over to the other part of the prairie that, was 8 feet tall that he worked so hard to restore, and with everyone in the family. And we were like, oh, it's getting late and it's cold, and our socks and, gloves were frozen, and, he's about 90 years old, I think, at this point. And said, well, and we'd gone kind of past behind my dad's house. I think we can just slide down there and then walk around up to the farm. And I thought, oh, Bobby, that's, there's trees, there's pokey things, there's, I don't know, a bobcat maybe. I don't know about that. I think we just have to go back around, down the divide. Nope, that'll take too long. And he plopped down and said, you come right after me. And he just slid all the way down the hill. And laughed. And it's, freezing. And so I did that too. And I remember when our grandmother was too weak to walk, we were at having a big family dinner, and he picked her up and just carried her everywhere. And he said things like, I'm just getting to know a new side of her. I remember asking him once if he believed in church stuff, because he would come here and I was sort of like, oh, Unitarians, that's cool, what's that? And he told me about a time that he was in the war in the trenches, as Abby mentioned, and said that he just prayed. He wasn't really sure who he was praying to, but he just was praying. And then he said when he made it through, he thought, oh, maybe there's something out there. But he was really comfortable not knowing or entertaining possibilities. I think he was sort of the first real introduction to a kind of a Zen calm that I got. When Richard Young closed downtown, I remember asking him, well, what's going to happen, And I think I was rambling about like bad government and politics and everything. Well, he just said, Rio, I'm just worried about my patients. He really had a knack for highlighting what mattered most. The brilliant family that he created is one I am so proud to be a part of. And I know that Bobby would be so proud of us all. So, thank you.
Poet Lord Alfred Tennyson wrote, "I am a part of all that I have met. Bob is a part of all who knew him. During this time, I invite anyone who would like to do so to share a memory of Bob. You might have a brief story about him, or simply wish to reflect a bit on the kind of person he was, or what was meaningful to you about knowing him. If you'd like to share, please come forward to the microphone so that all may hear you well. And if you need a mic brought to you, you can raise your hand and one of our tech support folks will bring it to you. I know we have some folks further west who are watching online with us. If you'd like something shared, you can put it in the YouTube chat and I will lift that up. Who'd like to begin? Yeah.
I'm Dave Jones, Bob's youngest brother, and share a little bit as we were growing up. I'm 10 years younger than he was, so I was a little kid when he was in high school, but I do remember a few things. He was drafted in 1943, and after the war started in 1941, and he went to the basic training in Georgia, I believe it was, and then back home for a little bit, and then he went to a special training program in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which was going to lead to a chance to be an officer in the Army. But they needed more soldiers in the Pacific, getting ready to invade the Philippines and Okinawa and so forth. So that was ended on a short circuit, and he came back through Nebraska on the way from Michigan to the Pacific coast. And my dad worked for the railroad, and so they knew what train he was going to be on, and he made arrangements with the people on the train that if he could stand in the doorway of the train car that he was on, he would stand there and wave to us when he went through Central City, and we were standing there next to the railroad, and as he zoomed by, we got to wave to him as he headed out to the Pacific coast train to go over to the Philippines and the Okinawa. So anyhow, once he got over there, and Abby talked about it, the fact that he had gotten wounded, when he was in the hospital recovering from the wound, he met a doctor that was a Nebraska resident, and the doctor told him that he ought to consider medicine as a career. And he followed up on that suggestion, and when he came back, went back to the University of Nebraska, and then made it through medical school. And that's how he ended up as a doctor. It was because encouraged by this doctor that he had met in the Army hospital. And Bob, I was 10 years younger, so I was a little kid when he was going through college and all that. But I do remember one time he came home. We were living in Central City at the time, and I went out to the golf course with him. He was an avid golfer at that time. And after I tagged along while he played, this was just in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the week. There wasn't anybody else out at the golf course. So I talked him into giving me a driving lesson around the golf course parking lot. And that was a big deal for me when I was about 10 or 12 or something like that. But after he went to medical, or was in medical college, and met Diane, and they were getting serious. So we came into Omaha and met Diane's parents, and met Diane for the first time, and they ended up getting married and resulted in the nice family that he had. So I just wanted to pass along those thoughts. But he was a great guy, great big brother to me. Thanks.
Good morning. Hope everyone can hear me. My name is Jean Simple Knox, and I was a social worker that worked with Dr. Jones at Richard Young for many years. And a couple of things come to mind. First of all, he was an excellent physician, extremely compassionate, caring, funny, very interested not only in the patients, but all the staff, taught us a lot of things. One of the things I remember was when I first started there, I was really like, how am I going to get through somebody that's had ECTs, electric shock therapy? I was like, ugh. And he told me, you know, you really will see a difference, and you'll see people that get better. And I did, to the point that, like I said, he had a sense of humor. One of his patients was a farmer that had them, and I was coming down the hallway, and the guy like slammed into me, like his, I don't want to say sexual urges, pardon me, that probably wasn't it, but the guy was, I would say, free. And your dad saw it and started laughing. He's like, oh, Jean, it's okay. I'm like, Dr. Jones, no, it's not. I'm afraid. That was one thing. The other thing was I was not married. Doesn't that sound like him? The other thing is I was not married, and he was very, very concerned about that. More concerned than I was. To the point, and Sarah, you can attest to this, he would be at the nurse's station and loudly say in front of everybody, to the point that the housekeeper even stopped, mopping or something, why aren't you married? I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a therapy session right here. Thank you very much. But I knew it was genuine concern. The last thing I will say is that, and I've never forgotten this, I'm Catholic, and he knew I was. And there was a patient of his from Logan, Iowa, by the name of Betty. And he walked to her room, and she was blind, and she was saying the rosary. I don't know if I can say it without crying. And he said to her, those beads bring you a source of comfort. And I say the rosary every day. I have never forgotten that. And I told him, I said, Dr. Jones, you are a Unitarian, and I have never heard a Catholic priest say that, and you need to evangelize that because it is true. So thank you. I know Mike, Matt, you did painting for me. I know Sarah, and Abby and I already visited, but you had wonderful, wonderful parents, and I loved your dad. And I was afraid I was going to be sad, but I can feel his presence here, so thank you very much.
You know, I'm Bob Perrin, and Bob was a part of our Unitarian family, which was even an important part of it. But he was also part of our breakfast group. We meet every Tuesday morning. And of course, I was the good Bob. Bob Bosco was the better Bob. And Bob Jones was the best Bob, of course. That's kind of how it worked out. We solved a lot of world problems, but since Bob hasn't been there, we haven't solved one yet. And he was also part of our golfing team, and we traveled to several cities around the country, I think Arizona, North Carolina, Florida. One time in Florida, now I kind of understand this a little bit after listening to the stories this morning, because it was in Florida that there was an alligator right next to where Bob's ball hit or landed. So he walked over, maybe 2 feet or so away, and just hit the ball. And we thought, my God, he's crazy. Alligators can travel fast. And then we thought, maybe he's cheap, because he isn't going to lose a ball. And then we realized after today that he was brave. Yeah. That's it.
I only knew Bob the last 5 years of his life. And if I had to say one word about Bob Jones, it would be integrity. If he gave his word, he kept his word. Abby can attest, I twisted his arm, I cajoled, everything. And if I could get him to say, yeah, I'll do it, he would. He never failed me. And he loved his family. It was very difficult for him to give up his independence and to have to rely on them and, face the challenges of aging. But he never, ever expressed that he was angry or frustrated. He was just so terribly grateful for the loving and wonderful family that surrounded him. What a wonderful example to all of us.
From 1975 till I left Richard Young in 1981, I had the honor of working with Dr. Jones. And he'll always be Dr. Jones to me. And my responsibility there was to work with the patient records. So I can't tell you how much I appreciated his handwriting. First of all, he wrote just like my dad. So no problem. And the personal thing I want to share is, while I was there, I was in my late 20s at that time, and he had expressed two things that told me he cared about me as a person. The first one was that I developed pneumonia. I missed work for a solid month. It took me another month of working first 4 hours a week until I could get up to 8 straight hours in a day. 6 months later, I had a relapse. And I came back to work, and the first thing he said to me, "Just what is your doctor prescribing for you?" And I told him, and he opened that big red PDR, and he looked it up, and he read it, and he says, "Well, that's okay, you can take that." But he was checking up on my doctor. And speaking of doctors, I remember how angry he was when his told him he couldn't run anymore. He was really mad about it because he was having trouble with his knees. And the last thing I'll share about how he told me or demonstrated that he cared for me is, at the time I had an alcoholic husband, and he helped me get him into Epley Care Center. And that was one of 6 other visits that were not a success, so he became not my husband, but his caring was really evident. So thank you so much for sharing your dad, your grandfather, your colleague, and your friend with me.
I just wanted to share a memory. Our families were very close when we were growing up, and Bob and Diane came to a party at my folks', and I was outside. They didn't know it when they left, and when they left, they were holding hands and laughing and smiling and clearly very much in love. And I remember thinking, wow, old people hold hands.
I'm Amy Stumer. Abby has been my ride or die friend and chosen sister since we were 15. So growing up and being in the Jones household, where Diane would ask you everything about what you dreamed last night, and Dr. Bob was always there, calm, with a kind smile, and safe. Fast forward a couple decades, I find myself on the Missouri River in a boat where the motor has stopped. A few people I don't know very well, and there's probably a lot of empty cans of beer. And I realize, I don't know what to do. This boat is drifting, drifting, drifting. And then I remember, calm, kind, safe. I call Dr. Bob, he calls the Coast Guard, and we are rescued. So thank you, Dr. Bob, and thanks to the Jones family, all of you. You have been a wonderful part of my life and inspired me in so many ways. And I will always treasure my Dr. Bob Potts. Thank you.
Thank you all. One more? Yeah, come on.
I hope I can remember what I want to say, because I don't have any memory anymore. You know, it's gone. The things I remember the most about Bob, he would tell everybody, especially me, I want you to just come over and laugh, because he liked my laugh. I said, will do. Once I was going through a horrific depression, just bad. And I came home one day from where I don't know, and on the table was chocolate cake, a big chocolate cake. And I knew immediately Bob had said it, because I always used to say after any meal, dinner, anywhere, where's the chocolate cake? So he got me a chocolate cake, which was so sweet. The other memory is, of zillions, is taking Rio, who was in our arms, out to the farm, and Bob and Diane are at the door, and Diane is all excited to see Rio, and she lunged for Bob and said, "Bobby!" And Diane and I looked at each other like, what did he do? What, he's just done nothing. He's just standing there. That's where the Bobby came from. Oh, there was one other story that was so good. I introduced Bob and Diane to Standard Poodles because Mike and I had gone to California for a couple of years. I had to do something with my Standard Poodle, and of course I asked them, and of course they said yes. And the poodle slept with Bob every night. We were gone. So when we got back, the poodle world started. Poodles and showing poodles. And, you know, I remember coming to the farm one day, there's Bob and Diane with two poodles picking ticks off of these poodles. I mean, like zillions of ticks. Just dumping them in a pail of water. I thought, you guys are something. I think that is all that I can remember because I don't remember anything. But oh yes, I do remember this one story. When I was first meeting the Jones family, we were at Nanny Jones's house, which was about this big. And all crowded in there, Nanny Jones had fixed this amazing, huge meal for all of us. She was something. She taught me to crochet, bless her heart. And we're all sort of sitting around, and Thatcher walks into the room, maybe 7, 8, I don't know how old he was. He walked right over to Bob, moved his arm off his lap, and sat on his lap. Just boom. And I thought, that is the sweetest thing I have ever seen. He didn't know Bob, and Bob just, there he was. She took amazing care of her husband, who had Parkinson's. And I mean, she did everything. Fed him, bathed him, dressed him, got him to bed at night, got him up the next morning. I have no idea how that happened. She was something. The last memory, which is not that great, but she was at my house visiting with my children, little kids. And I was leaving from the garage in the basement to go to work. And I turn my car on, pull out of this driveway that goes up the hill, and crash right into Nanny's car. I didn't know it was there. I didn't see it. Of course, I didn't look. Well, the car died. That car was dead. I had to go in and say, you know, this thing happened. And I wasn't looking, and I certainly didn't expect her to park the car at the bottom of the driveway, but she did. She said, no problem, no big deal. Oh boy, what a family. Thank you.
Thank you all for gifting us with these memories and stories and helping us see more of the person that Bob was, that no one person would know all of these things. I invite you now into a time of quiet, a time of prayer for some, of meditation or silent reflection for others. I'll begin with a common prayer, and then we'll move into the period of shared silence, which I'll end with the sound of the bell. As we begin, you may wish to close your eyes and make your body comfortable. Spirit of life and love, as we honor the life of Bob Jones, help us to recognize and celebrate the gifts that he brought into our lives. May our hearts be filled with gratitude for these gifts and for the joys of knowing Bob, his artistic sensibilities as both a booster and creator himself, the presence and optimism he brought to others' life journeys as a psychiatrist, the qualities of curiosity and adventuresomeness, his love of nature, be it in the Les Hills or sailing Lake Manawa, his quiet dignity and humility, that integrity and stability that drew all kinds of people and creatures to him, from children to folks we probably don't even know about. Gratitude for the man who showed determination in water and mud and through every stage of life, with the beautiful family that he and Diane created, and all of the friends. May we celebrate Bob's life and honor his memory by sharing with others, in turn, these gifts of knowing him. So may it be. Amen. A time of silence for your own private prayer or reflection. William Ellery Channing, the founder of Unitarianism, characterized a life well lived this way. I wonder if you can hear Bob in it. To laugh often and love much, to win and hold the respect of intelligent persons and the affection of little children, to earn the approbation of honest critics, and to endure without flinching the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty always, whether in earth's creations or human handiwork, to have sought for and found the best in others, and to have given it oneself, to leave the world better than one found it, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, a cheery letter, or a redeemed social condition, to have played with enthusiasm, laughed with exuberance, and sung with exultation, to go down to dust and dreams, knowing that the world is a wee bit better, and that even a single life breathes easier because we have lived well. This is to have succeeded. I didn't have the opportunity to get well acquainted with Bob Jones, but from all that I have learned about him, and I think supported by the testimony we heard today, he indeed succeeded in a life well lived. He was one to appreciate beauty always, whether in earth's creations or human handiwork. And he didn't just appreciate beauty, as we've heard, he created much beauty. I'm going to try to take the 30,000-foot view here and consider how Bob's own life is a work of art. As a ceramist begins with clay on the wheel, Bob's life began with the raw ingredients of human body, heart, mind, and spirit. His life was shaped not only by his parents' hands, but by larger forces, like the Great Depression of his childhood, like brushes with scarlet fever and diphtheria, like the Dust Bowl of the plains. From his own and his children's telling, I can see Bob's experience as a soldier drafted into World War II as a kind of firing. The intense pressure and trauma of serving in war changed him indelibly. The injury he received in Okinawa shortly before the war's end, as we heard, landed him in a field hospital where the wounds of the body were tended. And one of the attending physicians, a fellow Nebraskan, encouraged Bob to pursue medicine after the war, with the need evident in the other soldiers around him. Perhaps the final stage of glazing came after Bob returned home, when he met the woman that would become his life partner, Diane, with whom he would raise a beautiful family. With Diane's encouragement, professionally, Bob would specialize in psychiatry. And the colors and textures of Bob's life came together through all of these relationships. To complete the pottery analogy, Bob's life from his young adult years through to his centenarian lifespan was not abstract or merely decorative, but very much a functional one. His was a life of activity and productivity, as well as avid recreation. He worked hard, and he played hard. Now, unlike pottery, of course, a human life has no finite point when it's complete. As a curious, adventurous person, Bob continued to develop and grow throughout his 10 decades, both personally and professionally. Returning to Channing, Bob indeed sought for and found the best in others and gave it himself. He left the world better than he found it, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, a cheery letter, a chocolate cake, or a redeemed social condition. In Bob's case, he left the world better by the 4 children whose raising he considered his most important contribution, That's what he told us in an interview he did with church members just about a year and a half ago, I think. He left the world better by the patience, whose healing and growth he believed in, whom he would not give up on. He left the world better by restoring not only people's psyches, but also the restoration of the Les Hills Prairie, that patch of land that he loved so well. And he left the world better through his volunteer work at Open Door Mission and Sienna Francis House. As we celebrate Bob Jones' life, we have much inspiration for continuing to grow throughout our own lifespans, for however long we are each fortunate to get, for contributing to healing and beauty where we can, and for relishing the adventures of life. I want to close with these words of the Scottish poet, Robert Burns. I understand Bob was very fond of poetry. An honest man lies here at rest, as ere God with his image blessed, the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age and guide of youth. Few hearts like his, with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. May we cherish our memories of Bob, and may we too make the best of this world and its many gifts. So may it be. Amen. And Michael is going to extinguish the chalice for us. After the final music, everyone is invited downstairs to the common room, that's out the back and down the stairs, to visit and share refreshments. Now, the process of grieving will unfold differently for everyone. There's no right or wrong way to mourn, no rules about how you should feel, what you should do, or when you should be done grieving. Please be gentle with yourself and reach out when you need support.